Are you getting ready to plan an event and curious what hybrid really even means? We've been talking about virtual events and in person, live, hybrid. And if you know me, you know I love to talk about some of the industry jargon with events because I think some of it is really arbitrary. So I'm going to break down a couple different options you have for hybrid and how you can think about it at your next event. I'm Logan Clements, a freelance event producer based in Seattle, Washington, and I talk about event production, Zoom, in-person production, running your own business, anything events related. And I do encourage you to like, subscribe, turn on that little notification bell so you get notified every single Monday when I drop new videos. I also am the co-host of the Better Events podcast, so you can give us a follow wherever you listen to podcasts. It's more free information about events, tips and tricks, and we interview some really cool guests that we've worked with in the event industry. And if you've loved anything that I've been doing, I will link to my Buy Me a Coffee link. So one of the best ways to fuel an entrepreneur's dreams is through caffeine. So feel free if you'd like to continue to support all this free content that I'm making. But without further ado, let's get into it. I hate to break it to you folks, but hybrid events are here to stay. And what do I mean when I say hybrid? Hybrid is any combination of an in-person and a virtual element. And I say elements because you can have what feels like a virtual event because the attendees are virtual, but it's actually hybrid because you have a small group or your speakers are in person at a studio, at a location, and you're shooting that part of the event in person and broadcasting it out to virtual attendees. So hybrid can just mean a lot of things, and I found if you're someone who's looking to create a hybrid event, meaning an event that has both in-person and virtual components, you do kind of have to nail down exactly what kind of hybrid event you want to have, because this is only going to help your event producer, your planners, your vendors serve you better, and just understanding what you actually need. So the first option with hybrid is kind of that first example I teased there for you, is a hybrid event could be that you have your speakers are in person, or some of your speakers are in person, but your attendees are 100% virtual. So that means you would probably need, from an AV equipment standpoint, you're going to need lights, you're going to need cameras, you're going to need microphones, and you're going to need staff for all of that in-person part. The benefits of this, you're going to get a much better quality video by having that in-person shoot than you would by doing it 100% virtual using the webcams that all your speakers have in their computers. The downside, it's going to cost more because you are going to need cameras and microphones and lighting and people to run that equipment that know what they're doing. And the big one is really Wi-Fi, because we've all been on those virtual events where a speaker freezes and you're like, it must be their Wi-Fi at their house. Well, now it's very important that you have a very good Wi-Fi connection at your venue. And that's one option. Another hybrid setup could be that your audience is 100% in person and your speakers are a mix of in-person and virtual. And this is where you're going to then need an AV setup that enables you to bring in your speakers, whether you're using Zoom or Teams or some other virtual production tool, to bring in that speaker's video along with their slides, and figuring out, do you want the speakers to share their own slides and you're just looking at the Zoom interface on a big projection screen at your in-person event, or do you want something that's a little more polished where you're doing kind of overlays and they're advancing slides in Zoom, but you're advancing their slides for them as well in person for the entire in-person audience. Also, do those speakers need to be able to talk back and forth with the in-person audience? That's a different in-person AV tech setup. And then lastly, there's the hybrid that we're probably all thinking about, which is where you have your speakers, maybe they're in person or they're virtual, and your audience is in person and virtual. And with that can be really complex because there's 4 options there, and so you can have all kinds of kind of mix and matching, and different AV tech setups are needed for different ones, as well as your event goals. Is your goal that the in-person audience can talk to the virtual audience? Do you want them to have 2 completely separate experiences? Do you want to create that FOMO, that fear of missing out for the folks that tuned in virtually? Or do you actually want to prioritize the virtual audience and have your in-person audience, they're there, they're active, but you're going to have way more people online that you want to engage with? Those are a lot of questions, I know, and it's really helpful to talk to someone like myself or another event professional who has experience doing this to help you figure out what's the best fit for your event. Because I will say, none of these hybrid examples, just like my videos on virtual events, there's no one size fits all solution for everyone. It depends on what you're looking to do. So I would just encourage you to think about what kind of hybrid you want, because there's benefits and negatives to any of them. Again, if you're thinking the word hybrid, I will tell you as an event pro, your costs for your in-person AV is going to go up. It's going to look different than what we did before COVID, where we weren't our expectations weren't as high for the virtual experience. So you're going to be paying probably more money, especially if you're doing a simultaneous hybrid event where there's an in-person audience and a virtual audience. You need, if not two teams, at least two separate people who are thinking about those two different experiences. So your staffing costs are going to go up. But really think about what works for you. And I guess my last example of a hybrid is probably more traditional to what we were doing before COVID made us go 100% virtual, is you have a live event in person, your speakers are in person, you record it all, and then you release those recordings, whether just as a library for virtual attendees to watch at their will, or you can do it as just like a pre-recorded virtual event where you're releasing it like it's live, and your attendees can ask questions in the chat, and maybe your speakers are online too that day and they're answering questions in the chat. So there's varying degrees you can do from that. And that does take off some of that lift when I say extra people, extra personnel, because you could have your team focused on the in-person experience, and then if you're doing the virtual version maybe a month later, you can do that. But you're missing out on some of that on-screen interaction between your virtual audience and your in-person audience. So lots of food for thought. It's very exciting. If you want to talk about your hybrid event setup, or your head's still spinning from the beginning of when I just said the word hybrid, feel free to reach out. I do free 20-minute consultations with anyone about their event, so I'm happy to offer my 2 cents or give you a couple ideas. But as always, I'm Logan Clements, a freelance event producer, and this has been another installment of my favorite tips and tricks when it comes to event production, in-person, virtual, hybrid, as well as you're running your own business. And I'll talk to you guys again next week. Bye.